There are moments in aviation where the sky looks perfectly calm, yet it is hiding something really deadly. On the 9th of June 24, 1982, a Boeing 747 cruised peacefully at 37,000 feet over the Indian Ocean. The passengers aboard British Airways Flight 9 were relaxed. It was a routine leg from Kuala Lumpur to Perth. Four engines humming steadily, clear air, no storms on radar. Nothing suggested that within minutes the aircraft would become a 350-ton glider in the dark. Welcome back, aviation lovers. This is Flipside 05 and my name is Solomon, the geologist turned aviator. Long before I studied aerodynamics, flight systems and aircraft performance, I studied the Earth itself, tectonic plates, magma chambers, and the violent physics of volcanic eruptions. I spent years understanding how mountains explode and how ash travels through the atmosphere. What I never imagined was that even as an aviator, I would be studying volcanic activity, not from the ground but from 37,000 feet in the sky. Because what happened to British Airways Flight 9 sits precisely at the intersection of geology and aviation. Earlier that evening, Mount Galunggung in Indonesia had erupted. The volcano hurled an enormous cloud of ash high into the atmosphere. But in 1982, satellite monitoring was limited. There was no volcanic ash advisory centers, no global alert systems feeding real-time hazard data into cockpit briefings. The ash drifted silently across established airways and the crew of that 747 flew straight into it. Inside the cockpit, something began to feel wrong. It started subtly, a faint smoky smell, then an eerie glow appeared on the windscreen. St. Elmo's fire flickered along the glass, electrical discharges dancing in the darkness, the engines began to surge. To understand what was happening, you have to understand volcanic ash. It is not soft like fireplace residue, it is pulverized rock, microscopic shards of silica, essentially airborne glass. In geology, we study how these particles are formed when magma explosively fragments. In aviation, we study what happens when those particles enter a turbine engine. At cruise power, a jet engine's combustion chamber exceeds 1400 degrees Celsius. When ash enters that environment, it melts instantly. The molten material coats turbine blades and nozzle guide vanes. It clogs cooling passages, airflow becomes unstable, compressor stall begins. And then the unthinkable happened. Engine 1 flamed out, then engine 2, then 3, then 4. All four Rolls-Royce RB211 engines fell silent at 37,000 feet in the Boeing 747. The cockpit grew quieter in a way no pilot ever wants to hear. The autopilot disengaged, electrical systems degraded, pressurization began to drop, the aircraft, stripped of thrust, started descending through the night. A 747 without power is not a falling brick. It's an aircraft with a glide ratio of 15:1. From that altitude, it could travel nearly 90 nautical miles horizontally if managed correctly. But that glide would only buy time to restart engines that were now coated internally with volcanic glass. The crew began restart attempts, but nothing changed. The aircraft continued descending. In the cabin, oxygen masks deployed as altitude decreased. Passengers did not yet understand that every engine had failed. As they passed through lower altitudes, something critical changed. The outside air temperature increased relative to the combustion environment. The molten ash that had coated internal components began to cool and crack. Airflow improved slightly. At approximately 13,500 feet, engine 4 relit. Then another. One by one, all four engines came back to life, but the aircraft was far from healthy. The windscreen had been sandblasted almost opaque by ash traveling at high speed. Forward visibility was severely compromised. Engine parameters were unstable. Internal damage had occurred. The aircraft diverted to Jakarta for an instrument approach in darkness, relying heavily on cockpit instrumentation because outside visual references were distorted. They eventually landed safely. Inspection later revealed extensive turbine blade erosion and glass deposits inside the engines. The aircraft had essentially flown through a cloud of molten geology. For me, as someone who once studied magma viscosity curves and eruption columns, this story feels deeply personal. In geology, we learn how ash clouds can travel hundreds of miles suspended invisibly in the atmosphere. In aviation, we learn how engines depend on clean, stable airflow. That night proved what happens when those two collide. The incident transformed aviation forever. It led to the creation of global volcanic ash monitoring systems. It forced engine manufacturers to study particle tolerance. It changed flight planning procedures in volcanic regions. When Iceland erupted decades later and European airspace shut down, those decisions were rooted in lessons learned from this 747 over Indonesia. On that night, a volcano reached up and touched a machine built to conquer the skies. And because of skill, engineering, resilience, and a deep understanding of flight performance, that machine came home. This wasn't just an incident, it was a reminder that no matter how advanced we become, we still fly through a living planet. This is Solomon signing out for Flipside 05. See you on the next.